All right. So, in today's video, I wanted to talk a little about loneliness, which is definitely an important keyword, so to speak, because I don't know if loneliness is the cause, the origin of things or my situation, or if it's just a consequence or whatever. I don't fucking know. But the point being that loneliness definitely plays a big part in my life, and I'm not the only one, you know. Obviously, I'm narcissistically rambling about my own problems here on this channel, but yeah, you can also, maybe you've seen one of those newsletter articles or whatever that describe how basically our current generation is lonelier than fucking ever, which obviously begs the question, what happened? Like, what is fucking wrong with us? Now, an scapegoat you will oftentimes see is obviously social media, right? Social media makes us all lonely. And I was quick to dismiss these kind of claims not too long ago. But, maybe there is actually a point to that. Maybe it is, maybe social media did something with our brain that didn't exactly help in preventing loneliness, maybe like just the instant, maybe we're so used to instant gratification now that it's very easy for us to feel lonely. And you know but yeah, it's kind of hard because loneliness, it rarely comes on its own as a problem. I phrase that weirdly, but if you're lonely, chances are you're also unhappy, or I guess if you're lonely, you have to be unhappy in a way, right? And but not just that. I think that if you're lonely, then there's probably, usually, not always, and I will talk about that as well. But there's usually something else connected with that. It's not usually not like, oh, I'm lonely, even though everything is fucking great right now, and I was doing absolutely fine just not too long ago, and nothing about my situation, quote unquote, objectively changed. Which, of course, yeah, but that's not something that usually happens, right? But obviously, like, when I say objective, I mean like something that is can be observed by an outsider, for example, right? Because obviously you don't know how a person is doing just by their outside situation, right? Like, there are certain measures that correlate with, happiness, for example, money being one of them to a certain point, at least, that if you're very poor, then it will, well, it's not impossible, but it might be harder for you to be happy. And if you are well off, I'm not talking about like being super rich or whatever, because there's a whole set of problems that comes with that as well. But you know, generally speaking, people are a bit happier if they don't have to worry about paying rent or some shit like that, right? But even then, obviously, you could have everything in the world, or, well, not everything, but from an outsider's perspective, it might seem like you have everything in the world. You have money, a family, a great job. You maybe have people look up to you or whatever. You are gifted in something, I don't fucking know, and maybe you like, I don't know, like a famous soccer player or whatever, or football, if you will. And you could still be feeling fucking miserable, right? So obviously, you can't really look at these things from an objective perspective, which is also the reason why I find it very dumb when someone talks about their situation or whatever, kind of like what I'm doing right now, and then people say, "Oh, why are you not happy? Like, what's wrong with you? You are much more fortunate than people who are starving in fucking Africa or dying in wars or whatever the fuck." Which is true, and I'm not saying that my suffering is discrediting their suffering. Like that's always, for some reason, people have a really hard time of like just discerning between certain things or between two things. For like, or like, if you say, "Oh, I like X thing," then people are really quick to judge. Like, "Oh, so that means you dislike this other thing," or people always have to say like, "Oh, I like this thing because it's better than another thing." If you know what I mean, right? People always need to compare shit, and you know, it's fucking annoying. And what I, going back to the point I was trying to make, that I'm not trying to say that, yeah, look at me, boo hoo me, my suffering is much worse than these people who have quote unquote real problems and, fight in wars and don't have food and have to deal with all kinds of things that are obviously immediately more threatening to their existence itself, right? Like, obviously, being depressed is also unhealthy, and a worst case scenario, obviously, it can be deadly even. But like, not just talking about you know ending it, right? But I'm also like neurological speaking. I'm pretty sure I read something about that. That like depression is like genuinely terrible for your brain, and so is loneliness, which is I completely forgot that that was like the topic at hand, and I completely tangent away. But yeah, that's kind of this channel in a nutshell, I guess. So, yeah, right. So, but I think it's actually like a good way of going back to the problem that you might also say like, hey, why are people so lonely today if they have everything they could ever want, or like maybe not everything they could ever want, but they have they are fortunate in the sense that I mean, now obviously, or not just now, but in general, the world is obviously always fighting, and there's bad stuff happening in the world, right? But like for most people, in the and who live in like richer countries that are not directly um, influenced by war, which of course, like you know, war in the Ukraine or whatever, which is obviously like current topic, and obviously it has some influence, I guess, on other countries as well. And depending on how the situation evolves, it will continue to have an influence. But the point being, like if you're from the US, for example, you will not necessarily notice if there is like a war, a Middle Eastern war in the Middle East or whatever, right? So the point being, even though yes, there's obviously war and stuff, but comparatively speaking, if we look at history, this is not a period that is necessarily more prone to war or something. It's probably actually like less. People have always gone to war, unfortunately, and may be like that forever. And maybe that's will be the reason the reason why humanity just annihilates itself or whatever. But anyway, that's a different discussion. Point being, you could make make the argument like, why are people or young people so unhappy when, generally speaking, they are doing or they're more well off than maybe like 50 years ago. They obviously they are still. I don't want to fucking always try to say, oh, but actually there's in general terms, right? I'm always speaking in general terms, which should be fucking obvious at this point. But in general terms, people are not are probably richer or at least more well off than they were. I don't know, like again, 50, 60 years ago or whatever. But nevertheless, it seems like that people are nevertheless still disproportionately unhappy nowadays, and or at least more lonely, which I guess also, but yeah, let's talk about loneliness itself, right? And why are people so lonely? Obviously, I don't have an answer for that. If I had an easy answer to that, then I would probably do science or something and not talk to a camera alone in my room. But from my perspective, or at least from my situation, loneliness is something that has probably always been by my side, and maybe that's something that not everyone can relate to because, people will often say, like, oh, I am doing bad now, but when I was a child, everything was great, which obviously, nostalgia effect and stuff, it's probably not that easy. But, generally speaking, I do actually also think that I was more happy when I was a child, right? But nevertheless, when it comes to loneliness, especially, I'm definitely more lonely now than I was back then. But that isn't to say that I was not lonely at all back then, because that's just not true. And I can actually think back about situations where I was lonely as a child. And the thing is, you've probably heard of this before, but it's a sentiment I agree with, but it's basically the saying that you could be alone but not lonely, and you could be not alone but still lonely, right? And, I definitely agree with that because as a child, especially, I can think back to situations where I was surrounded by countless people or my friends, and, everything was, happy go lucky and everyone was having fun. And then I just had like this snap of like sudden like existential dread or something. I don't know. Maybe existential dread would be maybe like a too advanced concept for someone who is like 10 or whatever. But just this feeling of, in hindsight, I would just describe it as loneliness and feeling like I don't really feel connected to all these kind of people. And yeah, it's a terrible feeling, obviously, but I've always felt that and I still feel it. Sometimes I'm sitting in my room and, well, not sometimes, I'm doing that quite a lot these days, but if I'm sitting in my room, I am oftentimes lonely. And when I go out, then, and I think that's something that most people can agree with, that once you go out and once you meet people, you're kind of distracted, right? But to me, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are, or maybe you're not feeling lonely in the moment, but I don't think it's a long term solution either, because I really have that a lot when I go out, I'm distracted, I do stuff, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes I'm not even that can distract me, and sometimes even when I'm among friends and stuff, and we're doing stuff and drinking or whatever, then even then I suddenly get really fucking lonely, right? But let's say that's like the worst case scenario, and generally I'm more distracted when I'm out with friends or doing stuff, something like that, right? Um, but the thing is, like, literally the moment I go back home, like the moment we say our goodbyes and I go back, like the moment that happens, I'm like immediately lonely again, or I can feel the effect of loneliness just immediately again. And, you know, it sort of begs the question, like, how can I solve that? Because it feels like there is just nothing really that solves that feeling of loneliness, even if I'm, like I said, among people who I consider to be my friends. That's like not enough to solve my loneliness, and it feels like I'm really always trying to fill that hole with something, with some kind of distraction, with some kind of human interaction. But the moment, you know obviously maybe not obviously, but maybe I'm also not social enough in a sense that, maybe I have to really go out a lot more, so much that at some point I'm craving to be alone again. And maybe that will make me less lonely then, instead of being, kind of being forced to be alone and lonely again, which again, you don't always have to be lonely when you're alone. I know that's what I said, but let's just say that generally speaking, I would also agree that you are probably more prone to loneliness when you're alone, right? So the thing is, you are, again, maybe I just have to be like a lot more social, but I think that it's, you will never be able to, unless you have like a partner or something, a partner, like someone who is like, or like, or maybe if you live with someone or whatever, that obviously often being a partner. But the point being, you will always encounter situations where you have to be by yourself, like even if you have like a partner, like romantically speaking, right? And you try to spend as much time possible with each other, there will still be times where you will be on your own, right? And but even if not, let's say, even if you like try to really continuously just stay by each other's side all the time, then yes, that's, I mean, good for you. If you love each other, then it's obviously a good thing. But I don't think that's like really. It it seems like more of like a treatment of the symptoms rather than the cause. The cause being, and not the cause, and the the problem itself. The problem itself being that you cannot handle being on your own, and I think trying to quote unquote distract yourself from that doesn't, in the long term, solve that issue, right? So yeah, I don't know if other people experience this kind of stuff as well, but yeah, there's also the question of, or I already said that, sometimes I don't feel less lonely just because I have people around me. And that's also another thing where talking about loneliness or this kind of issues, for example, is definitely not a bad thing, right? And even making these kind of videos is not a bad thing. However, I also don't know if it will really solve anything, right? And, you know, talking with someone about these things, maybe it's, again, like, it might provide for some short term relief, but I once again do not feel as if it's really solving the issue, like, even if I'm talking about loneliness with someone, which is, doesn't happen really often, which is why I make these videos, right? But even if I do, I still feel like maybe like a bit better for like a few minutes, and then I'm like, okay, like, now what? Like, I'm still fucking lonely again, and no matter how much I will talk about it, that will not change. And so one might question like, hey, why are you doing these videos then? Which is a good question, but these videos are not really meant to be like a solution for my problems, or like, it's more meant to be like a kind of, how you say, just to a just a chronic or something of just, something where I can see how my mental state has evolved over time, or maybe doesn't evolve over time, and how I'm basically stuck in the same way of thinking. Or yeah, or maybe if someone else out there ever watched this video, that they can maybe also, maybe relate to that, what I have to say, even if it doesn't necessarily solve their problem. Maybe there is just someone out there at some point who will watch one of these videos and think, you know what, I can relate to that, and that makes me feel a little bit relieved that there is someone out there who goes through similar stuff. Because when I watch other people talk about the stuff, again, it doesn't necessarily solve anything. It doesn't, it's not like I watch someone talk about their problems and I'm like, oh, I guess I don't have any problems anymore. But it still helps a little bit, I guess, and a little bit is better than nothing. Just like, meeting people and going out, a little bit, even if it's just a short time distraction, I guess it's at the end of the day still better than just sitting around and, forcing yourself to be lonely, which is also, some people might say, hey, maybe you're just afraid of being alone. Just force yourself to be alone, and maybe that will provide relief, which I've done. I've been alone plenty of times before, and I wouldn't really say that necessarily solves the issue, which again, you could make the argument, oh, maybe that's also like, maybe you were alone, but maybe not, maybe you were still getting gratification from social media, or, maybe you were still trying to be connected with other people, maybe you really have to be like a fucking monk for a month or something, right? Just isolate yourself completely from everyone, um, you know, switch off your phone, don't use your PC, laptop, or whatever, don't use any device, and just be really completely on your own for like a month or whatever. Maybe that would actually help. Maybe, maybe that's something I should try at some point, but it's also fucking hard. Like, let's be honest. At this point, it's very hard to say, like, for a month, oh, like, no one can talk to me for a month, like, at all, no matter what it is, that's just not really a realistic way of approaching things, I believe, because, you will probably always have some kind of responsibility for something, and, even if it's just getting the fucking groceries or whatever, but you will probably always have to interact with someone or whatever, so, but yeah, maybe that's not the problem. Maybe this whole fucking social media detoxing thing does actually help, but I don't know if it does, to be honest, which is kind of going back to the point, is social media just poisoning our brains, or is it something else entirely? And I could really not tell you. Like, maybe social media and being like so fucking addicted to YouTube and stuff didn't exactly help in my years growing up, but nowadays I also don't really know if just being abstinent from all that stuff would be like the easy solution, because it sounds like an easy solution, and an easy solution, if something sounds like an easy solution, then it's probably bullshit, that's usually how it is, right? And that's how I think about it as well. And honestly, I don't even fucking feel like I'm like that addicted to social media. Like, yes, I use YouTube a lot and I watch anime a lot, but anime is not, that's not social media, is it? I mean, you're watching stuff. And that's what I'm doing on YouTube as well. Like, I'm not on Instagram or some shit, right? Like, regarding Instagram, when you always see like these people who always, try to post themselves as like the best versions of themselves, and you're always thinking like, oh, why are all these people so attractive? Why do they have so much money? Why are they so happy? What's wrong with me? Like, I definitely think that's bad for you. But again, I've already kind of freed myself from that, I don't really, like, sometimes, rarely I do, but I don't really scroll through Reddit anymore. I don't go through Insta Reels or whatever. I basically already don't use that much social media except for again YouTube and stuff. But the reason why I'm well doing YouTube as well, but the reason why I'm watching YouTube is because I'm just bored. Like, what else am I supposed to do? Like, am I just supposed to be bored all the time? Like, I don't like. Again, like I try to distract myself with other stuff as well. It's not like I'm chronically sitting around and watching YouTube. Even though I might do it a little too much, but I still try to do a lot of physical activity and stuff to keep my mind occupied. But again, like even then, at some point, you're probably just gonna sit down and have some off time. And maybe some people might say, hey, instead of trying to distract yourself with watching something, just live like in the moment at that point in time, and just sit in the silence and do that every day, and maybe that will also bring some relief regarding your loneliness. Maybe, but I'm not quite sure about that, to be honest. Um I think I have some problems, but I don't think that social media is really my problem. I've maybe social media, like I said, kind of helped in shaping that problem, but I don't think that social media is really the thing that I really need to look out for. I think there are other things which are more important in that regard. But maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe I'm wrong. So yeah, bottom line is apparently we are all fucking lonely these days. I don't know why. Maybe we need to connect more outside of the internet. But even then, as I've already tried to explain, even when I try to do that, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So, you know, what else is there? What else can you really do about it then? To which, as always, I don't have an answer. But these videos are not meant to be answers, right? These videos are meant to be just, I guess, open discussions about stuff. And, maybe we get some introspective along the way, or maybe not. And, that's just how it is. So, yeah, we again close to the half-hour mark. I was kind of talkative again, I guess. I thought I was only gonna do like a 10-minute video, but apparently not. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you and goodbye.